The courtroom camera captured the exact moment when arrogance met its match. Karen Henderson, her face twisted with rage and flushed crimson red, stood, pointing her finger directly at Judge Judy Sheindlin, like a weapon aimed at the most feared television judge in America. The words that exploded from her mouth would be replayed 35 million times in the next 48 hours, becoming the most viral courtroom moment of the decade. "I pay your salary." The declaration hung in the air like a grenade that had just been thrown but hadn't yet exploded. What happened in the silence that followed would destroy Karen Henderson's life completely. Expose her as a serial scammer who had stolen from hardworking contractors for years, and deliver the most satisfying justice in television history. But here's what makes this story unbelievable. Karen didn't just lose her case. She didn't just get embarrassed on national television. What Judge Judy did to her in the next 3 minutes was so devastating, so brutally precise, so perfectly executed that it became a masterclass in how authority crushes entitlement. Judge Judy had been setting a trap from the very first question, and Karen Henderson had walked right into it with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences before the complete annihilation of the most entitled Karen ever caught on camera. You need to understand exactly who this woman was and why this moment had been building for years. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to witness will restore your faith that bullies eventually get what they deserve. And you won't want to miss a single second of this spectacular destruction. Karen Henderson was 48 years old, a substitute teacher from suburban Connecticut who had spent the last decade perfecting the art of weaponizing her status as a taxpayer against anyone she considered beneath her. She wasn't just your average difficult customer or complaining neighbor. Karen had elevated entitlement into a full-time hobby, a crusade, an identity that shaped every interaction she had with the world. She called herself a taxpayer advocate and citizen watchdog, terms that sounded noble until you understood what they meant in practice. Karen spent her days filming government employees doing their jobs, searching for any minor mistake or perceived inefficiency she could turn into content for her growing social media following. Her tactics were always the same. She would enter a post office, a DMV, a public library in a government building with her phone already recording. Then she would create a problem, manufacture a complaint, escalate a minor issue into a confrontation, all while her camera captured footage she would later edit into a gotcha video portraying lazy government workers disrespecting hardworking taxpayers like herself. Her catchphrase, used in at least 15 documented incidents over 3 years, was always the same: "I pay your salary." Those 4 words were her weapon, her shield, her justification for treating public employees like personal servants who existed only to cater to her. Demands Karen's digital footprint revealed someone addicted to the power high of intimidating people who couldn't fight back. She was the admin of a local Facebook group with over 3,000 members, an echo chamber where she rallied angry residents against what she called government waste and bureaucratic incompetence. Her posts received hundreds of likes and shares, creating a feedback loop that strengthened her belief that she was doing important work holding the system accountable, fighting for the little guy. But anyone who actually knew Karen understood the truth. She wasn't fighting for anyone but herself. And her crusade against government employees was only the public face of a darker pattern of behavior. The real Karen Henderson, the one Judge Judy's research team had uncovered, was far more sinister than a social media agitator. Karen had a history that would make your blood boil. A pattern of deliberately targeting people who worked with their hands and relied on prompt payment to support their families. Over the past 4 years, she had hired contractor after contractor to work on her home. And with each one, she executed the exact same scam with ruthless efficiency. She would hire someone for legitimate work, agree to the price, sign the contract, and even express satisfaction while the job was being completed. Then, when the time came for the final payment, Karen would turn into a completely different person. The accusations would begin. The work was substandard. There was damage to her property. The contractor had violated the agreement. Yet Karen never gave specifics, never provided real evidence, and never allowed the contractor a chance to fix whatever she claimed was wrong. Instead, she would refuse payment, start a social media campaign to ruin their reputation, leave one-star reviews on every platform she could find, and post their phone numbers in her Facebook group, triggering waves of harassment that devastated their small businesses. David Chin was exactly the type of person that Karen Henderson had learned to exploit through years of perfecting her contractor scam. He was a small business owner without the financial means to fight back, an immigrant who had built his reputation on hard work and honesty, and someone whose livelihood depended entirely on word-of-mouth referrals and online reviews. When Karen targeted David, she assumed he would be another easy victim, who would walk away from the final payment rather than deal with the costs and stress of legal action. But she made one crucial mistake. David Chen was not going to allow a bully to destroy the business he had spent 15 years building, even if defending himself put his family's finances at risk. David had come to America 17 years earlier with $300, a toolbox passed down from his father, and a firm belief that hard work would be rewarded. He started by taking the jobs established contractors didn't want, the small repairs and minor renovations that barely covered his expenses. But he approached every job, no matter how small, with careful attention to detail and genuine pride in his work. Within 5 years, he had built a reputation any contractor would envy. Flawless 5-star ratings across every site, a waiting list of customers requesting him specifically, and the kind of word-of-mouth trust that money could never buy. He had achieved the American dream through nothing but skill, integrity, and treating every home as if it were his own. When Karen Henderson contacted David about renovating her bathroom, everything seemed normal at first. She was friendly during the initial consultation, reasonable about the timeline, and agreed to his $3,200, quote, without negotiation or hesitation. David had no reason to suspect that this seemingly pleasant homeowner was actually a predator who had perfected her scam. The job went smoothly, just like David's work always did. He arrived on time every day, kept the workspace clean, communicated clearly, and completed everything exactly as the contract stated. The finished bathroom looked beautiful, exactly what Karen had requested, and more. During the final walkthrough, Karen smiled and nodded, appearing genuinely pleased with the quality of his work. She took photos of the completed bathroom and commented on how much better it looked than she had expected. David left believing he had completed another successful project and earned another 5-star review. He had already mentally divided the $3,200 final payment, $1,500 toward his daughter's college tuition, $1,000 to catch up on business expenses, and the rest for the anniversary dinner he had promised his wife for months, but that payment never arrived. And what happened instead nearly destroyed everything he had built. 3 days after finishing the job, David sent Karen a polite invoice reminder, assuming she had been busy. No response. After a week, he called her, leaving a friendly voicemail about the best time to collect the payment. The phone call he received in return came from someone he barely recognized. Karen's voice was cold, hostile, and full of accusations. She claimed the work was substandard, that there were problems she hadn't noticed during the walkthrough, and that David had damaged other parts of her property. When David offered to return immediately to address any issues, Karen refused, insisting she wouldn't allow someone so incompetent back into her home. That's when the real nightmare began. As David watched helplessly while Karen carried out a campaign of destruction that threatened everything he had worked for. Within 24 hours, one-star reviews appeared on every platform where David's business was listed. The reviews were detailed, emotional, and completely fabricated. Karen claimed David had ruined her bathroom, damaged her walls, left her home in disarray, and then refused to correct his mistakes. She posted warnings in local community groups urging homeowners to avoid him. She took David's business phone number and shared it in her Facebook group. Urging followers to call and demand refunds for customers she insisted David had scammed. The harassment started immediately and became overwhelming. David's phone rang non-stop with angry calls from people who believed Karen's lies. His email inbox filled with hateful messages. Potential customers saw the sudden surge of negative reviews and canceled their appointments. Within 2 weeks, David's business had dropped by 60%, leaving him in a financial crisis that threatened his family's stability. His wife, Jennifer, begged him to walk away to consider the $3,200 a loss and try to rebuild his reputation slowly. But David had seen what happened to contractors who let Karen win. Their businesses never recovered. Their names remained ruined. And Karen moved on to her next target with even more confidence, determined not to become another casualty of her scam. David made the toughest decision of his career. He hired a lawyer he couldn't afford, gathered every piece of documentation he had, and prepared to fight back against someone who had clearly done this many times before and escaped consequences. What Karen Henderson didn't know what she couldn't have anticipated. As she rehearsed for her big appearance on national television was that Judge Judy. Shinlin had already uncovered her entire operation before she even entered the courtroom. Judge Judy's research team had done what terrified defendants and thrilled audiences. They dug deep, following clues that linked Karen's current case to a long-standing pattern of behavior by the time the cameras began rolling. Judge Judy had assembled a file on Karen Henderson that looked like a prosecutor's dream, detailing not just a single dispute over a contractor's payment, but an entire criminal scheme disguised as consumer complaints. The investigation began routinely, with Judge Judy's team reviewing the basic case file submitted by David Chen, a contractor arguing he had completed his work properly and deserved the remaining payment, versus a homeowner claiming poor workmanship and property damage. On the surface, it resembled the typical disputes that filled small claims courts across the country, but after 25 years on the bench, Judge Judy had developed an instinct desiccates sense for when something in the paperwork didn't ring true. Karen's written statement was too vague, too emotional, too focused on attacking David's character rather than listing specific defects in his work. That alone was enough to prompt further investigation. What they uncovered was far more damning than Judge Judy expected. The research team found 3 previous contractors with almost identical stories about Karen Henderson. In 2019, James Martinez spent 2 weeks painting Karen's house for $1,800. Karen approved the work, signed off on completion, then refused to pay, claiming the paint was already peeling and showed poor workmanship. James, a father of 3 without the means for legal action, eventually gave up the money after Karen posted his phone number online, and he received hundreds of harassing calls on 2021. Robert Williams installed new flooring on Karen's entire first level, a job costing $2,400. The same pattern repeated itself every time. The same claims of substandard work, the same refusal to pay, the same destructive social media campaign. Robert tried to fight back through small claims court, but Karen dragged the process out and complicated it until he finally gave up, unable to miss any more work for court appearances in 2022. Linda Patterson performed electrical work in Karen's home, bringing everything up to code for $1,900. Linda, a single mother working hard to build her electrical contracting business, was devastated when Karen used the exact same tactic against her. Approval, followed by accusations. Refusal to pay, followed by online harassment. Reputation destruction, followed by financial collapse. Linda went bankrupt within 6 months. Her business ruined by the unpaid bill and the flood of negative reviews Karen had spread across every platform. The pattern was unmistakable, and it revealed something that infuriated Judge Judy. Karen Henderson was a predator who deliberately targeted hardworking contractors, used their completed work without paying for it, and then destroyed their reputations so they couldn't fight back. But the evidence that would ultimately bring Karen down came from her own digital footprint posts she had made, believing she was clever and untouchable. Judge Judy's team found screenshots from Karen's Facebook group, posts where she openly explained her strategy for avoiding final payments to contractors. One post from 8 months earlier read like a fraud manual. "Here's how to avoid paying final bills to contractors," Karen wrote, followed by a detailed guide on how to spot minor imperfections, how to deny access for repairs, how to time reviews for maximum harm, and how to use social media to make fighting back too expensive and exhausting for small business owners. Another post was even more blatant. "These contractors expect us to just hand over thousands of dollars," Karen wrote. "Make them work for it. Make them prove every single charge. Most of them will just give up and move on to easier customers." Judge Judy read those posts with the cold fury of someone who had spent decades watching bullies prey on decent people. She had seen every type of scammer, every form of con artist, every brand of entitled individual who believed they could manipulate the system. But Karen's scheme was particularly infuriating. She wasn't stealing from corporations, insurance companies, or wealthy individuals who could absorb the loss. She was targeting hard-working immigrants and small business owners who needed every payment to support their families and keep their companies afloat. Karen had found the most vulnerable victims possible and refined her scam into a repeatable system that allowed her to avoid more than $12,000 in contractor bills. The trap Judge Judy prepared was exact in its design. She would let Karen present her case first, allow her to grow confident, let her deliver her rehearsed complaints about substandard work and property damage. Judge Judy would ask simple, routine questions, pulling Karen deeper into her own lies. Then, when Karen inevitably revealed her true character through arrogance and disrespect, Judge Judy would reveal the evidence Karen didn't know existed. The courtroom was filled with its usual energy as the cameras rolled and the audience settled in, expecting another typical small claims dispute to play out. David Chen sat at the plaintiff's table, his hands folded over a thick folder of documentation he had spent weeks preparing. Every receipt, every text message, and every photograph of his completed work was organized in chronological order, ready to demonstrate that he had done exactly what Karen Henderson had hired him to do. Across from him, Karen sat with the posture of someone who believed she had already won. Her designer handbag was placed prominently on the table beside her, and her expression radiated the confidence of someone accustomed to getting away with this exact behavior for years. Judge Judy began the hearing with her trademark directness, cutting through any potential theatrics with the efficiency of a surgeon making the first incision. "Mr. Chen, you're suing Ms. Henderson for $3,200, claiming she refused to pay you for bathroom renovation work you completed according to contract. Tell me what happened." David's testimony was calm and deliberate, guiding Judge Judy through the events with the precision of someone who had lived every step of the ordeal. He explained the initial consultation, the signed contract that included Karen's approval of all details, the 2 weeks of work completed on time, and the final walkthrough during which Karen expressed complete satisfaction. He presented photos of the finished bathroom, texts from Karen complimenting his attention to detail, and the signed contract outlining the payment terms. "Work was uneven," she claimed. though she couldn't identify any uneven tiles in the photos. The plumbing made strange noises, she insisted, though she had no recordings or expert opinions. The grout was already cracking, she said. Despite David's photos showing flawless work, Judge Judy's questions became sharper, more focused, designed to reveal the inconsistencies in Karen's account. Ms. Henderson, you texted Mr. Chen 3 days after completion saying the bathroom exceeded your expectations. Why would you say that if the work was substandard? Karen responded with the first flash of arrogance that would eventually undo her. Well, I was being polite, Your Honor. I didn't want to be rude, but I noticed problems later. The explanation made no sense, and Judge Judy pushed further. You noticed uneven tile work after saying it exceeded your expectations. You discovered plumbing issues after praising his attention to detail. Karen's face began to redden as she realized the questioning was not unfolding the way she had anticipated. The turning point came when Judge Judy asked the one question Karen should have expected, but somehow didn't. Ms. Henderson, have you had disputes with other contractors in the past? The courtroom fell silent as Karen stiffened, her confident posture beginning to crack. That's irrelevant to this case, Your Honor. Judge Judy's reply was ice cold. I'll decide what's relevant in my courtroom. Answer the question. Karen shifted in her seat, gripping the edge of the table. Once or twice, maybe. There were contractors who did poor work. Judge Judy leaned forward slightly, her gaze locked on Karen with the precision of a predator spotting its prey's weakness. Define once or twice, Ms. Henderson. How many contractors have you withheld final payments from? Karen's anger began to rise, her face reddening as she realized she was being cornered with no way out. I don't see how this has anything to do with this specific case. Judge Judy's voice sliced through the air. Answer the question, Ms. Henderson. How many? Karen suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, startling several people in the audience. You know what? I don't have to tolerate this kind of harassment in a courtroom. This is clearly biased against me as a consumer. Judge Judy's command was firm and absolute. Sit down, Ms. Henderson. But Karen had already crossed the point of no return. Years of getting away with her scheme had convinced her she could intimidate anyone, even the most feared judge on television. Towel voice rose into a shout that echoed through the courtroom and would later be replayed millions of times across social media. No. You're supposed to be impartial, but you're clearly taking his side because he's pretending to be the victim. I came here expecting justice, and instead, I'm being attacked. This is your courtroom. I pay your salary. I'm a taxpayer, and you work for me. The silence that followed was total and suffocating. Every person in the room froze, stunned by what they had just witnessed. Karen stood there, breathing hard, her finger still pointed at Judge Judy, her face flushed with rage. The cameras caught everything's a shock on David Chen's face, the wide-eyed disbelief of the audience, and above all, Judge Judy's expression, shifting from professional patience to something far more dangerous. The 7 seconds of silence that followed felt endless. A moment suspended in time as the entire courtroom waited for the inevitable explosion. Judge Judy sat completely still, her hands folded on the bench, her eyes fixed on Karen with a level of intensity that made people in the audience physically uncomfortable. This was not someone who had been startled or intimidated. This was someone who had been waiting for this exact moment. Someone who had expected this display of entitlement, and who was now prepared to deliver a lesson in respect and dignity, and consequences that would echo online for years. When Judge Judy finally spoke, her voice was calm and steady, carrying a deadly quiet authority more frightening than any shout could be. Ms. Henderson, let me educate you on something, since you clearly need the instruction. You don't pay my salary. CBS Television does. I have a contract with a television network, a private corporation. You are not my employer. You are not my boss. You are not my supervisor. You are a litigant who signed an arbitration agreement to have your case heard in this forum. Karen attempted to interrupt, but Judge Judy raised her hand, stopping her instantly. I'm not finished. When you signed that agreement, you waived your right to a public courtroom. This is private arbitration. So your little speech about being a taxpayer is completely irrelevant, utterly meaningless, and profoundly disrespectful. Karen's expression began to change, anger draining from her face, replaced by a pale, ashen look as the reality of her situation finally pierced her wall of arrogance. But her voice still carried a hint of defiance as she tried to defend herself. Well, technically, as a taxpayer and a citizen, I have rights. Judge Judy cut her off with surgical precision. You have the right to be respectful in my courtroom. You have the right to provide evidence, which you failed to do. You have the right to tell the truth, which you've also failed to do. And you had the right to leave here with some dignity, which you threw away the moment you decided to scream at me. The courtroom stayed silent as Judge Judy reached for a folder that had been sitting on her bench from the start. A folder Karen had noticed earlier but assumed was standard paperwork. Now, Judge Judy said, "Let's discuss your pattern of behavior, Ms. Henderson, because I consider it very relevant to this case and to your credibility as a witness." She opened the folder slowly, building the tension as she pulled out one document after another. In 2019, you hired James Martinez to paint your house. The job totaled $1,800. You approved the work. And then you refused to pay the final balance, claiming the paint was already peeling. Mr. Martinez walked away from that money after you posted his phone number online, and he received hundreds of harassing calls. Karen's mouth fell open, her eyes widening as she realized Judge Judy knew everything, that the trap had been set long before she entered the courtroom. That was a legitimate dispute. She stammered weakly. He did poor work, Judge Judy continued as if she hadn't spoken. In 2021, you hired Robert Williams to install flooring. Cost $2,400. Same pattern. Approval, followed by accusations. Refusal to pay, then online harassment. Mr. Williams attempted to fight you in small claims court, but you dragged out the process until he couldn't afford to miss more work. Karen's hands began to shake as her carefully built facade collapsed. In 2022, Judge Judy went on. Linda Patterson performed electrical work in your home for $1,900, a single mother trying to build her business, and you destroyed her. She filed for bankruptcy within 6 months because of the unpaid job and the negative reviews you systematically posted everywhere you could. The audience gasped as the full scale of Karen's pattern became clear. This wasn't a single misunderstanding. This was a long-running scam targeting hard-working contractors. But Judge Judy wasn't done. That's $6,100 in refused payments before we even reach Mr. Chen's case. That is a pattern, Ms. Henderson. That's not bad luck. That is fraud. Karen tried one last desperate attempt at defense, her voice cracking. Those were legitimate disputes. I have the right to refuse payment for substandard work. Judge Judy's reply was devastating in its simplicity. Then why don't you have any photographs of this substandard work? Why is there no expert testimony? Why is there no documentation at all, besides your own vague accusations? The finishing blow came when Judge Judy pulled out the final pieces of evidence, printed copies of Karen's own social media posts that the research team had uncovered. And here, Judge Judy said, her voice thick with contempt, is what tells me everything I need to know about you, Ms. Henderson. These are posts from your Facebook group She held up the first printout and read Karen's own words aloud. Here's how to avoid paying final bills to contractors. You literally wrote a step-by-step guide to committing fraud. She picked up another. Print out and read it with deliberate emphasis. You literally wrote an instruction manual for fraud. Judge Judy lifted another page. And here's another post. She read it with deliberate emphasis. These contractors expect us to just hand over thousands of dollars. Make them work for it. Make them prove every single charge. Most of them will just give up and move on to easier customers. The courtroom erupted with gasps and murmurs of disbelief. Karen's face turned completely white, our earlier confidence and fury replaced by pure horror as she realized her own words, her own posts. Her own digital trail had destroyed any credibility she thought she had. Her transformation from aggressive bully to shattered defendant happened in seconds. Her entire posture collapsing as the weight of Judge Judy's evidence crushed the arrogance that had fueled years of successful scams. Her hands trembled as she gripped the table knot for dramatic effect. But because she genuinely needed the support to stay upright, the woman who had walked into the courtroom expecting to humiliate yet another contractor on national television was now confronted with the devastating truth that she had been exposed as a serial fraud in front of millions. Her mouth opened and closed, trying to form words that might somehow undo the damage. But nothing she could say could erase the impact of hearing her own posts. Read back to her in Judge Judy's contempt-filled tone. Wait, Karen finally stammered, her voice stripped of all earlier aggression. Those posts? They were just venting. I didn't actually mean. Judge Judy cut her off with merciless precision. You didn't mean the step-by-step instructions on how to defraud contractors. You didn't mean the admission that you target people until they give up. Ms. Henderson, these aren't jokes. These aren't exaggerations. These are confessions. You documented your own criminal scheme and posted it publicly because you thought you were clever and untouchable. Karen's face collapsed entirely as tears streamed down her cheeks, her makeup running in dark streaks that the cameras captured with unforgiving clarity. Please, Your Honor, she sobbed. Any remaining dignity, gone. I didn't know this would happen. I never thought about it. I was just trying to protect myself as a consumer. Judge Judy showed no sympathy. You weren't protecting yourself. You were stealing from hardworking people who depended on those payments to support their families. You weaponized social media and review platforms to destroy the reputations of honest contractors. You turned being a customer into a scam where you received free work and they ended up bankrupt. She continued, her tone unyielding. The judgment I'm about to issue isn't only about Mr. Chun, though. He absolutely deserves every penny you owe him. This is about accountability for a pattern of fraud that has destroyed multiple small businesses and harmed multiple families. The ruling dropped like a hammer, every word hitting Karen with the force of unavoidable justice. Judgment for the plaintiff, David Chen, in the amount of $3,200 for unpaid work completed according to contract. Judge Judy paused, letting the words settle before going on. Additionally, I am awarding Mr. Chen $2,500 in damages for the reputational harm caused by your false reviews and social media harassment. That brings your total judgment to $5,700. Ms. Henderson. Karen's sob broke into a loud wail as the financial reality hit her. But Judge Judy wasn't finished. Furthermore, she said, I am referring this case to the Connecticut Attorney General's Office for Investigation of Consumer Fraud. Your social media posts constitute evidence of a pattern of fraudulent behavior that may rise to the level of criminal charges. The gavel came down with finality. Echoing through the stunned courtroom, David Chen sat still for a long moment. barely able to comprehend that after months of harassment and financial turmoil. He had not only been vindicated, but awarded more than he had even requested. Tears filled his eyes, tears of relief, of justice, of validation that his integrity and workmanship mattered. Karen remained standing, shaking with sobs. As the bailiff approached to escort her from the courtroom, her cries echoed down the hallway as she stumbled out. The sound captured by the microphones and destined to become part of the viral storm that had already begun forming. Within 24 hours, the footage of Karen's outburst and her complete unraveling had spread across every major social media platform. The moment she yelled, "I pay your salary," at Judge Judy had been clipped, shared, remixed, and turned into memes that ensured her place in internet infamy. The hashtag #IPI your salary began trending on Twitter, used sarcastically by millions, mocking entitled behavior whenever they encountered it. The view count skyrocketed 5 million in the first 6 hours, 15 million by the end of the day, and 35 million within a week. Karen Henderson had finally achieved the attention she always craved with her social media theatrics, but in a way she never could have predicted. The real-world consequences for Karen came fast and hit hard. Her substitute teaching job was terminated within 48 hours. The school board citing a documented pattern of harassment toward coworkers that had never been addressed until now. Her Facebook group was removed after mass reports, with thousands flagging it for encouraging fraudulent conduct. The 3 contractors she had previously scammed James Martinez, Robert Williams, and Linda Patterson were empowered by her public exposure and filed civil lawsuits demanding their payments plus damages. They had each lived with the shame and financial ruin caused by Karen's schemes. But now they had both evidence and momentum on their side. The Connecticut Attorney General's office opened a formal investigation, and local news stations picked up the story, airing segments about the substitute teacher turned serial scammer brought down by Judge Judy. Meanwhile, David Chen's business underwent a complete reversal of fortune. Consultation requests poured in from people who had seen his vindication on television. A GoFundMe started by strangers raised over $50,000 to help him recover from the damage Karen had inflicted. Local news featured him as the contractor who stood up to a bully and won, turning him into a symbol of hardworking small business owners refusing to let fraud go unchallenged. Most importantly, he received the full payment of the judgment within 48 hours. Karen's husband apparently deciding that paying quickly was better than further press coverage on their family. Smash that like button if you think Karen got exactly what she deserved after years of stealing from hard-working contractors. Comment justice served if you believe Judge Judy delivered the perfect rebuttal to someone who thought shouting, "I pay your salary," would intimidate a judge with 25 years of experience. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more incredible courtroom moments where entitled people learn that respect isn't optional and consequences are very real. Share this video with anyone who has ever been bullied by a customer who thought they could get away with fraud. The internet never forgets, and Karen Henderson learned that lesson in the most public and humiliating way possible. Sometimes the most satisfying justice doesn't come from revenge, but from watching someone's own words and actions destroy the carefully crafted facade they spent years maintaining. Karen believed she was untouchable, but she ignored one crucial truth. In Judge Judy's courtroom, arrogance doesn't shield you, it guarantees your downfall.